Bob Ballou. I serve as chair of the council on behalf of DEM Director Coy. And Pete, can you just first of all note that there is another meeting going on over in the hazard room, and that meeting is which meeting?
It is the Fisheries Advisory Board with the wind, exactly which one, I'm not sure, but.
I'm not sure what they're doing tonight, but it's the CRMC
Fisheries Advisory Board. So if you happen to be here for that meeting, you're in the wrong room. That's across the street. This is a meeting of the Rhode Island Marine Fisheries Council. I've called the meeting to order. I've announced my name, Bob Ballou. I'm repeating myself, chairing on behalf of DEM Director Coy. Before we jump into the agenda, it's been a while since we met. In fact, it was April 1st of last spring when we last met. So since then, there have been two reappointments to the council and one new appointment. The reappointments are Dave Monty and Chris Ryan. Chris is not here yet, but Dave Monty is to my right. Dave, you want to raise your hand for the audience? So Dave has been reappointed to a second full term by the governor and confirmed by the Senate, as has Chris Ryan. And we're very pleased to welcome Katie Egan to my left as a new member of the council. And I'm just going to take 2 minutes to just, for those who don't know Katie, a lot of us do, but perhaps not everyone here. So I'd just like to take the opportunity to welcome Katie and introduce her. And I'll do that by reading from the governor's appointment letter. And it reads as follows. Miss Egan has been a lifelong Rhode Island commercial fisherman. She began working with her father, also a lifelong Rhode Island commercial fisherman, at a very young age, and obtained her first student shellfish license at the ripe age of 11. Throughout high school and college, she worked as a deckhand in the quahog fishery during the winter and in the lobster fishery during the summer. Since 2008, she has worked full-time as a commercial fisherman, commercial fisherwoman, you can use those words interchangeably, participating year-round in various fisheries in and around Narragansett Bay, utilizing various gear types. She is the owner-operator of a 24-foot vessel she uses primarily for harvesting shellfish, including whelk quahogs and softshell clams. Ms. Egan has emerged as a leader in the industry, taking on the mantle of de facto representative of East Bay commercial shellfish interests. She has served on the council's Shellfish Advisory Panel since 2013, and she is on the board of 2 organizations, Eating with the Ecosystem and Save Bristol Harbor. She has been actively involved with several fishing gear technology studies conducted through DEM, University of Rhode Island, and Rhode Island Sea Grant. Ms. Egan earned her BS in Marine Affairs from the University of Rhode Island, majoring in coastal marine policy and management with a minor in fisheries. She is committed to advancing the interests of Rhode Island's commercial fisheries via effective communication. She has a strong desire to leverage her strong connections with industry, academia, and management to forge a more effective working relationship within Rhode Island's marine fishing community. She recognizes the different interests and perspectives among commercial sectors and between the commercial and recreational fisheries, and she has the desire and capability to find the middle ground and help bridge these divides. She also recognizes the need to help sustain the fisheries by encouraging and incentivizing more young people to become engaged. As a relatively young person, steeped in experience, Ms. Egan, who I will now refer to her hereafter as Katie, brings a fresh perspective to the council, and she has the very special distinction of being the first woman to serve on the council since its inception almost 40 years ago. So welcome, Katie. With that, we'll jump right into tonight's agenda. The first item on the agenda is the agenda itself. Does any member of the council have any recommended changes to the agenda? Seeing no suggested changes, is there any objection to adopting the agenda as proposed? Seeing no objection, the agenda as proposed stands approved by consent, and we're on to the next item, which are the meeting minutes from the last meeting. That would be the meeting held on April 1st, 2019. Are there any recommended changes? Andy D'Angelo?
Yeah, down where it, talking about the TOG, and I made a motion that Rhode Island should look back at the unfair disadvantage that we have with the state of Massachusetts, and they put it under bluefish instead of under TOG.
Ah, good catch.
Yep,
Pete,
so I'll move that up to TOG. I'll re-listen, find out what the motion is. Bluefish was just pretty sure it was pretty special.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
good.
So we'll make that
thank
correction.
you so much for catching that, Andy. We'll make that correction. Are there any other changes? Seeing none, is there any objection to approving the minutes as amended per Andy's recommendation? Seeing no objection, the the meeting minutes as revised stand approved by consent. And we're on to the next item, which is public comment. So this is an opportunity for anyone here tonight from the public who would like to address the council on any item that's not on the agenda to do so. Would anyone like to address the council from the public? Yes, Ron Kenyon.
So I actually, it's a request. I don't think I should speak to you now because a lot of what I mentioned during the last meeting, Jason, I think, is going to address in a little bit. But I don't know if I'd have time to question or comment after his address. So
You will.
Fantastic.
So we will, when that item comes up, we'll give you that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for particularly maybe Katie's edification, but for anyone else as well, whenever anyone offers a comment during this portion of the agenda, we typically tee it up as an agenda item at the next meeting. So that's exactly how things are going to proceed tonight with regard to the items that Ron raised at the last meeting. So thank you for that, and we will be addressing those as agenda items in a bit. Next is the council webpage. So this is an issue that has been in the works for several months now. Pete, with my assistance, has been, I think, doing a good job putting together a nice first time ever council webpage, and I believe he's provided copies.
That's what it will look like, pretty much.
One second, sir. Let me just introduce the topic, and then I'll give you an opportunity to comment.
Yeah, okay, I just wanted to get on that agenda.
Oh, well then I'm sorry, then thank you. So I didn't see your hand go up. So would you like to offer a public comment?
I just have a question about the small mesh up in Narragansett Bay, north of, going to changes on November 1st, I believe. The old rule from, I don't know what they called it, but set back in the 80s.
John Lake?
So we have a rule that in the northern part of the bay, pretty much, if you cut the bay in half northward after November 1st, you have to fish with a 6-inch mesh. You cannot fish with a smaller mesh, so.
Is that the rule you're referring to, sir?
Right, I wonder if we can get that, a chance of getting that extended to December 1st.
Does that sound like something that potentially could be added to a public hearing docket?
So do we have this queued up for?
The reason it was there is for some,
We don't, John just got this, and so we just got an email like a few days ago about this.
Yeah, so, yes.
So we we will add that as a item in an upcoming public hearing docket, which means it'll be an item to be considered during an upcoming workshop, followed by a public hearing, followed by council consideration. It'll go through the entire sequence. And I don't know if we have a date for that or suggested date.
We do,
Ken?
November 12th, we're looking to workshop, October 16th.
October 16 workshop?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so you might want to hold that, Jay?
Yeah, and just to be clear, so this wouldn't, I think you're probably wondering if this is relevant for this year. There's, getting into that public hearing would not get it in place in time,
That's
just given the length of the process, just to be
Okay.
sure that that's clear. But it would be in place for the following year.
So we can take it up for consideration this year, beginning at a workshop on October 12th, followed
16th.
by 16th, followed by a public hearing in November, followed by council consideration probably in December, followed by final decision by the director probably soon after that. But to Jason McNamee's point, it would not take effect until next year, 2020.
okay, now, I think this past year is the first time they actually tried to enforce it, right?
That I can't speak to, I don't know. But it is apparently on the books, and if it's on the books, it means that's the rule. But we appreciate you bringing it up for consideration, and we will add it to the docket, and it'll get a full vetting.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. Is there anyone else wishing to address the council on any item that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will now move on to item 4, which is the council webpage. So I think, yes, Pete handed out a hard copy of what the webpage looks like now. I think it's in pretty darn good shape, but we leave that up to you as council members to really decide. What's missing is that we just need one more photo, and that's from Mike Roderick, who's not here tonight, and 4 more bios from Mike, Chris Ryan, Chris isn't here yet, Jason Jarvis, and Travis Barrow. So if Jason and Travis, since you're here tonight, I'm going to address you directly. We'll put the same message or request to Mike Roderick and Chris Ryan. But if you could just get a quick bio to Pete by the end of this week, ideally. That would be awesome. We don't want to post this with any holes. We think it's a nice public outreach piece, and we'd like to get this up and live as early as next week, but we didn't want to do that without, with holes for council members. So, Jason, is that something you think you could pull off? Awesome, thank you so much. Are there any comments on the draft as presented to you? If not, Jay, Magdalene?
Just quick for Travis and Jason, I mean, even just a snippet from your application for the council would be perfectly fine, save you some work.
Okay. And if you can't dig that up, let me know. I can find it and scan it and send it to you. So whatever, we just want to make it easier for you guys, but we don't want to have it live without all council members.
Just one more thing, Mr. Chair.
In the-
So I found Travis's picture online, so I'm asking you if you're okay with that picture. And Andy's, I couldn't scan yours, so I found another one of you, so I'm asking if you're okay. I think they're both good.
I'll send you a different one.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much. So Pete's your point of contact on this, and we're just trying to really kick the tires on this to get it finished by the end of this week and up live next week, and we think it's going to be a nice step forward. If there are no other questions or comments on that, we can move forward. If you do have any comments after the meeting, you can certainly relay those to Pete by the end of the week. Next is item 5, which is committee appointments. So the first, there are a couple items here. The first one is to nominate and approve a new Shellfish Advisory Panel chair. The chair had been Jeff Grant, who, as you know, has termed out and is no longer on the council. So we do need a new SAP chair. Katie Egan, who happens to be very much involved in the shellfish industry, has volunteered to serve in that capacity, but it's completely up to this council to nominate a chair. And so if anyone else wishes to nominate themselves or someone else, you're welcome to. Or if anyone wishes to nominate Katie, you're welcome to. Mike Rice?
I'd like to nominate Katie as chair.
Is there a seconded by Dave Monti? Is there any discussion on that? Is there any opposition to the motion? Seeing no opposition, congratulations, Katie. You are the new chair of the council's Shellfish Advisory Panel, and I do think we have a meeting coming up in the near future, so you'll want to coordinate primarily with Connor McManus, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Anna Williams.
Anna, so if you and Anna have not yet traded contact information, please do, so that you guys can stay in close touch on scheduling of meetings and that sort of thing, on other logistical issues. Thank you and congratulations, Katie. Good to have you on board as a council member and quickly taking on the mantle of Shellfish Advisory Chair as well. The second part of item 5 is just to quickly review the memberships for both the Shellfish Advisory Panel and the Industry Advisory Committee. These are the only 2 subcommittees that the council has, but they're both important. And we do anticipate some changes with the Industry Advisory Committee. I don't want to really speak for anyone because we're not 100% sure about the status of certain folks, but we have a sense that some members who you see listed here may have an interest in dropping out, and we know of at least one other member not yet listed here who has been representing the lobster commercial lobster fishing industry on the commercial side, also indicating that he would no longer wishes to serve. So we'd like to fill those positions, and what I'd like to suggest as a way to do that is to put out a listserv broadly to the Rhode Island fishing community seeking interest in being appointed to the committee, and then those candidates would come before the council at our next meeting for consideration and appointment. And between now and then, if any council member can think of someone who you might know who might be a particularly good representative, and I will say there's a vacancy in particular with regard to recreational fishing. So perhaps Travis and Dave, you might.
On which one? I'm sorry.
So we're on the Industry Advisory Committee.
Okay, yeah.
This is set up by statute.
Yeah.
And these positions, in terms of the sector that they need to represent, are pretty much baked in. So we do have a vacancy for someone representing the recreational fishing community, and it would be wonderful to have a candidate or 2 or more come forward for consideration by this council. We may also have some gaps once we get those confirmed in some of these other categories. So what we thought we'd do is soon after this meeting, probably by the end of this week, put out a listserv notice seeking interest on the part of anyone who might be interested. We'll put a deadline in there probably at least 3 weeks out or so, and then see what we get in the way of interest, and then bring those candidates before the council at the next meeting, because it's the council who needs to appoint. And again, I wanted to, at the same time, give all members here a little nudge that if you can think of people who might be particularly well suited, particularly after you see the listserv notice and see the sectors that will be vacant, it would be great for you to drop a dime on those folks and suggest that they apply, because we have a good committee and we want to keep it good and strong. The same goes for the Shellfish Advisory Panel. I think that's actually fairly well constituted right now. We know we will have at least one vacancy because Katie had been serving on that panel and essentially representing East Bay commercial and perhaps recreational shellfish interests. So I think it would be really nice, because we do have a number of West Bay shellfish representatives on there now, to perhaps see if there might be someone from East Bay who would be willing to serve. And I'm looking at Katie because I'm thinking if you could maybe put that word out on the street, so to speak, and see if there might be some interest on the part of anyone you know from that community. We would certainly welcome a candidate from the East Bay with a shellfish orientation. And then, Pete, do we need any, is that the only key issue with regard to the Shellfish Advisory Panel?
Yeah, that one looks pretty good. I'll confirm what's going on with the IAC and then let everyone know who's might be
And because we don't have a cap on, well, actually I think we do have a cap, but we haven't met that yet with this current membership. We'll do the same thing. We'll put out a listserv notice. We'll see if there's interest on the part of anyone on serving on the Shellfish Advisory Panel, and then we'll again bring candidates before this council at our next meeting. So that's a quick run through, and take any questions or comments in the audience. Yes,
Yeah,
Ken.
I'd be interested in doing the shellfish.
Oh, that's awesome,
advisory.
Ken. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
I can also respond to the email if you're going to do something.
Yeah. We're going to put out a listserv, and that'll probably have Pete's contact information if I'm correct. Whatever it says in the email, if you could just respond.
Yeah, I will.
And thank you. We really appreciate your interest. That's good to know. Any other questions or comments from the council on this item? Seeing none, we will move on to item 6, which is the meeting summary from the very body that we were just discussing, and that is the Industry Advisory Committee, IAC I think we actually call it, which met recently in August, and I believe John Lake is going to provide a very brief overview. And just to provide context, I'm probably stealing your thunder, John, but the meeting that was just held by the IAC was a follow-up to a workshop that was held at the end of May. The next step in the process is a public hearing, which will be held tomorrow night. Is it in this room or is it across the street? This room tomorrow night will be a public hearing on the very items that John's about to report out on that the IAC discussed on August 19th. And then at the next council meeting in October, those items will all be coming before this council for consideration and recommendation to the director. So with that, John, did you want to provide a brief overview of the IAC meeting?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So we met on August 19th this year. We went through the division, and the department had some proposals that we went through. These proposals, I'm not going to go into great detail, but these proposals included some data reporting clarifications for both party charter and commercial. We were moving to clarify what fields need to be reported and the timing of when the reports are due. We looked over the requirements to advance to the next level after having a student shellfish license, moving up into the lesser commercial category. We are looking to clarify what happens when someone changes residency relative to their commercial fishing license. We are looking at a change to our prioritization process, which would try to prevent practice of license flipping. That's selling off a license and then getting a lesser license, building it up sometimes through questionable means, and then offering it for sale again as soon as possible. We also were adding some reporting compliance measures for dealers to get their reports in. The committee had no objections going forward with any of our items, nor did they have any alternative proposals, so they had no dissension on that one. The other thing that we go through each year is we look at the exit-entry ratios for 3 of our license types, and they make a determination as to whether or not the ratios need to be changed. In this case, they offered no change to any of the ratios, so just to go through them, the first one would be for new cohog licenses. With no change, in 2020, the department would issue 36 new cohog licenses. The next one would be soft-shell clam. With no change in 2020, the department would issue 6 soft-shell clam licenses. And for restricted finfish, there, once again, no change. That would result in 15 licenses for 2020. This is almost identical to last year, with the exception there were only 33 cohogs last year. Beyond that, we had some other business, just updates, where we wanted to give the committee a chance to weigh in if they wanted to about a proposal that's industry proposal to make the fluke exemption permit a little bit easier to move from vessel to vessel. They want, the proposal will go over, would look to change the amount of time you have to make the change to if a vessel is sold. It would no longer require the exemption permit to be tied to a federal permit if one exists, nor would it make the exemption permit necessarily be tied to the actual vessel. So these are big changes. We wanted the Industry Advisory Committee to have a stab at offering advice. They were general, although they offered no official advice, they were pleased with the industry proposal. Also, there's another proposal coming through the works that Rhode Island is partnering with Connecticut, as well as potentially with New York as well. And this proposal would allow vessels fishing during the winter one, this is a pilot project, vessels fishing during the winter one period to possess multi-state possession limits for summer flounder. Therefore, they could come into Rhode Island, land their limit, and then move on to Connecticut and land their limit. Once again, although no official advice given, they were favorable towards that proposal as well. And then the final thing that we went through is just an update on the division is queuing up our legislative proposal to restructure our commercial licensing and party charter licenses. We gave a brief update on where that was.
Thanks, John. Questions for John? Seeing none, thank you for that report. Is there any objection to receiving that report and placing it on file? Seeing no objection. Question, yeah.
What was the last item, the restructuring?
Yeah, sure. So for about 5 years or so, I'm losing track of. But the division, so Marine Fisheries has wanted to readdress some of our rules with our commercial licenses, including the fees. We would move to increase fees. But more importantly, try to get the licenses more in step with a little more effective management. One of the glaring ones, our party charter license right now is a 2-year license, and it is only $25 for resident and non-resident. Other ones include some of our commercial fishing licenses. They're a little bit cumbersome right now. We have, like for example, you get a restricted finfish and a non-restricted finfish. If you want bluefish, you have to have the non-restricted. If you want fluke, you have to have the restricted. That can be a little confusing to people. That also results in one of the sectors being maybe treated a little bit unfairly. If you are a shell fisherman, in order to get all your endorsements, that license actually would cost more than a multi-purpose license. So that's something we would move to fix, try to make it more of an even playing field across all the licenses. Also, there are some considerations to looking to maybe exploring a system that would allow some licensure to someone's commercial fishing vessel. So those are kind of the highlights. There's a lot of other minutiae in there. We've been working towards it for a while, and we're just waiting for the governor's office approval to go forward. So,
Jay?
Yeah, just a couple of quick additions. I think the thing that kind of spawned this initiative was the shellfish management plan, and John spoke to it, but one of the things that has evolved in the current system is you've got licenses that do very similar things that can cost hundreds of dollars, differently. So it's particularly egregious for the shellfish licenses, and so that was one of the things that came out of the shellfish management plan was fix that part. And so that's what kind of got us thinking about it, that the key is the restructure of the licenses. The goals are to make them much simpler, like what John said, this idea of if you have the restricted category, it's all encompassing, and to make them kind of progress in a rational way. And we want to get back to actually embracing flexibility, and so we're actually incorporating the multi-purpose into this licensing system rather than trying to get rid of it. And so just a couple of things, that, flexibility and simplicity are two of the goals of the initiative.
And if we're not, I'm sorry, Dave, if I could just jump in. If I'm not mistaken, the hope and expectation is that pending approval by the governor's office as a legislative proposal, we would workshop it. We would have a public workshop before we seek to have it introduced as a bill in the General Assembly, say January, February. So between now and then, again, pending approval by the governor's office to move forward as a proposed legislative initiative, we would schedule a workshop, a public workshop to review the proposal, get some input, enable some fine tuning before it's introduced to the General Assembly. And then, as our dear colleague Mike Rice, who is a former legislator, knows, once it's introduced as a bill in the General Assembly, it's subject to modification, amendment, hearings, and through that hearing process, modification and amendment. So this would only be the start of a long process that would have a number of inputs, a number of opportunities for public input. I'm sorry, I want to just throw that out as what I understand to be our game plan. Jay, did you want to comment on that?
Just to speak to that, so absolutely, there will be public vetting. I'm not sure which process it's going to go into, budget or legislative, so we're not sure on that yet. But absolutely, we'll have workshops. And as well, I'll do, to the extent possible, like when we did this a few years back, I went and met personally with all of the association heads and some of the seafood processors. So to the extent possible, I go out and try and talk to people in a little bit more casual format as well, and I'll do that again.
Thanks. Dave, Monty?
Well, in regard to the party and charter boat licenses, industry has been speaking with DEM for a while about that. And jump in handy, I mean, we've had a lot of discussions. Should we increase it to help prohibit the number of licenses, both in-state and out-of-state, actually? So it's something that DEM's not considering just to raise more money. It's a purposeful act.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Dave.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, is there any opposition or objection, I should say, to receiving and placing on file the IAC meeting report, which is on pages 121 and 122 of the e-packet? Seeing none, that will be placed on file, and it will be provided again when this council meets in October to review the public hearing record and, of course, the IAC meeting, and then undertakes its deliberations on recommendations to the director. So with that, we'll move on. And actually, I'm going to do something a little unorthodox. I should have done this at the beginning of the meeting, but particularly with some new faces here in the room, I think it's a good form to kind of go around, and at least with regard to DEM, Division of Marine Fisheries, to have, and we have legal counsel here, so I think it's really good to introduce ourselves. So why don't we start with, I'll just go right down the room, starting with Pete Duhamel. If you could just introduce yourself and kind of indicate your role, your position and role with the division, that'd be helpful. And I'm going to go right down the line with all DEM staff.
Pete Duhamel, my title is Principal Planner. I'm responsible for all the council activities and setting up the meetings and the hearings, and I work with staff on all the regulatory amendments and the filing of the annotated regs and adopting new regs.
So Pete's your primary guy for council-related business. Nicole?
Nicole Langell-Costa. I'm a principal biologist with Marine Fisheries. I work primarily on striped bass. I work on the Rhode Island management of Menhaden with Jason McNamee. I am involved in whiting at the New England Council, several ACCSP committees, and I run our Finfish Age and Growth Laboratory in Jamestown.
Thank you. Jay?
Jason McNamee, the chief of the Division of Marine Fisheries. So I sort of oversee the program, but I also focus in on a couple of finfish species, specifically menhaden. I do a lot of multi-species stuff as well. That's probably enough.
Kind of everything in the world is Jay's portfolio. Christina?
I'm Christina Hostman, I'm Senior Legal Counsel for DEM, and I am the new and improved Gary Power, so I'm the legal counsel for the council.
So Christina serves as this council's legal counsel. counsel, two different spellings but the same pronunciation. Go to Mike.
I'm Mike Bucko, I'm the lead biologist of the APIS program, which is the Access Point Angler Survey, which is basically surveying recreational anglers for the Ember program.
John Link, I'm a supervising biologist at Marine Fisheries. I'm the staff member for the Industry Advisory Committee, as well as the recreational program coordinator.
Next, from DEM staff.
Chris Parkins, principal marine biologist. I run the trawl survey. I help the recreational fishery outreach program and help manage the floating fish traps amongst whatever else.
Anna?
I'm Anna Gerber-Williams, and I'm also the Marine Fisheries Principal Biologist. I run the Narragansett Bay Juvenile Snake Survey, and I also help out with all the aquaculture permitting work and other permitting work that comes through the office.
Thanks.
I'm Corinne Truesdale, I'm a principal biologist at Division of Marine Fisheries as well. I run our ventless trap survey, and I focus mostly on lobster, donor crab, and Atlantic herring research and management.
Thank you very much. And all members of DEM staff are available at any time to any council member or any member of the public who may wish to contact any of them, depending on their area of expertise. So I just thought it would be helpful to put some names with faces with names. And having done that, we will now move on to item 7, which is responses to public comments made from the last meeting. So this maps right into Ron Kenyon's suggestions for some reporting out on issues that he was interested in at the last meeting. I think there are 3, and with that I'll start. Turn over to Jason, and we'll go through them one by one, starting with commercial horseshoe crab quota and harvest.
Yep, and I'm very glad that Ron is here. So Ron, I think I have a sense of what you're after, but just drill into anything if I've not answered your question. So my understanding, the crux of your question was, we have a quota, but the way we've constructed the management system now, it's almost impossible to achieve that quota. And so a couple of things that we wanted to bring up. The first is there was just an assessment for horseshoe crabs. You may or may not be aware of that, but I guess to boil it down, our area, we're in an area where we're assessed in combination with the state of Massachusetts. These are pretty simple assessments. They are basically running time series analysis on the data that we have available. And so for our region, we had one area that was going up, and the area going up wasn't Rhode Island, it was the Massachusetts data. And the Rhode Island data set is flat to decreasing. In the end, what they decided, since it's a combination of the 2 data sets, they said the stock is stable for that region, and so they didn't recommend any decreases in quota or anything like that for us. So that part is good news, but we still see a troubling signal, and we're not sure, so we're kind of lumped in with Massachusetts. We're not sure the importance of the spatial domain for these animals. We've got a staff member, I know you know her, Natalie Amaral, who's going to actually do a study on the genetic aspects of the population to determine, whether or not you can differentiate a Little Narragansett Bay population from the greater Massachusetts, Rhode Island area. That gives us a sense of whether or not these smaller scale spatial dynamics are important for these different areas, and that could kind of set us off into some different types of of management responses depending on the outcome of that. But we won't have that for a little bit. We took some management measures in 2017, and that is basically what has kind of curtailed our ability to achieve our quota. We took those for a couple of different reasons. One was that negative signal in our indices. The other was we had routinely gone over the quota in every year prior to the change. And so we kept having to compound year after year, and that kind of accounting that we do, we were getting to the point where we were going to have to close the entire season to catch back up with the accounting over the years. And so we put those regulations in place. It's a long-lived species. They live 20 years. It takes them 10 years to get the sexual maturity. So it's going to take us a while before we know, before we can see whether or not the existing management measures have had an effect. So, we've got to wait a few more years to see that. But I guess that was just some background information. I guess to jump to the point, we don't see that we should make any dramatic changes in our current management to try and get after that quota. And there's two ways that we can sort of think about this, and that is one thing we can do if it's not rational to have a quota that you're not going to allow people to get. Once we get some of this additional information, we'll be able to rationalize the quota with what can actually be removed in a biologically feasible way. The other is to kind of hang where we are now and wait a couple years to see what this management, what the effect is. If we start to see an increased nut population again, we kind of change direction in our indices, then we can go back to the existing regulations and begin to open them up a little bit to try and get better performance on that quota. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take questions from the council or Ron or.
Yeah, why don't we do this? Why don't we, since Ron, you were the one that teed it up, why don't we give you the first crack at any questions or comments you might want to make, and then we'll go to the council, and then we'll go to anyone else in the here who would like to address the issue. Ron?
Sure. I prefer not to go tit for tat. I have a basic information about this as well. I was here when they made the original, Jeff Grant actually made the original proposal to go to 60 crabs with the exception of May. So they closed May entirely for bait harvest. So they did two things. Basically what they did was they took two variables and they hammered them both. They closed all of May for the bait fishery, and they went to 60 crabs a day. So you can't take one of those variables against the other without taking them both together. So ultimately what's happened is since that date, since that motion that the board passed, every year we've been, drastically under the bait commercial quota. And so my thought process was, it's been 3 years, let's revisit it. So perhaps, I'm not saying go back to the way it was, which was unlimited bait harvest until the quota was filled, and then everybody was at a loss once the quota was filled. I completely do not want that. However, to not go back and revisit either the closing May or the 60 crabs a day, you're never going to get up to what we're allowed to harvest until that happens. So admittedly, there's not a lot of data. And actually part of the problem with this particular species is there's really not a lot of data. I've seen the surveys that you take information from. I've looked at in depth the charts and the graphs and all of the different areas that we collectively get information from about horseshoe crabs, and it's just not really solid information across the board for all of Rhode Island. We use the trawl survey. Somebody here is in charge of the trawl survey, which it's hit or miss depending on where the trawl is and the way horseshoe crabs work. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but it's not really a substantial way to use the information given. So the information that I'm looking at is strictly, you made this huge change to the industry. It didn't pan out the way that we expected it to pan out. In other words, Originally, I think you were like, well, let's close May because that makes it a little easier for the law enforcement and people that take advantage and kind of over-harvest May, along with biomedical people, which I'm actually permitted to do both. Chose not to do both this year. But I get that, so it's easier for the law enforcement officers not to have to contend with, oh, are you a biomedical person, or are you, but they've also, and I don't know if you're aware of this, they also put in another caveat to the licensing that you have to have the permission of the single dealer in Rhode Island before you can get your license.
Biomedical.
It's biomedical. So, in fact, for the law enforcement end of it, if you're out collecting horseshoe crabs, they can look at the biomedical information because there's a very limited amount of that from one person, and they can compare the two and say, wow, this person took 2,000 crabs from this particular area, but didn't sell them to the person they got permission from, biomedical speaking, and they sold them as bait. So there are checks and balances in that respect now that also weren't taken into consideration when they made the original, when you guys made the original vote to change to 60 crabs and then closing all of May. So that went into place. So now you have to have permission of the biomedical dealer around to get your license in order to sell biomedical crabs. So the law enforcement end of it has kind of already been taken care of. And then to close all of May, which is the most productive time for collecting horseshoe crabs, and then have the quota so low for 3 years in a row, just to me it calls for a change. And I know that collecting more data is probably beneficial. The data that's already been established over 3 years is pretty substantial. Like, it's hard to get over that for me. So when I originally came up, I was hoping possibly not to go way back to where we were, but to maybe come up with something that would be, you could open May, or you could increase the amount. You can project forward, if you did 100 crabs a day, how many fishermen there are, both biomedically and bait. And you can project forward how long that harvest time would be. At ultimate, if everybody harvested every single day. And then I think you'd find that there's ample room there for a change in the statute, for sure.
I'm going to give Jay a chance to respond, and then I'll go to the council with any questions or comments they may have. Jay?
Yep, so I guess I'll start off with, we can absolutely, in particular if the council wants us to, we can bring this back out to hearing. It's always an option, and we can vet some proposals. I guess what we're trying to do is be forthright with you and say, at this point, given that we have not seen any response in our data, that we have, we're always in a data deficit for everything in fisheries. We do the best we can with what we have. And we've got not only the DEM trawl survey, but also the GSO trawl survey that's been going since 1959. So we have, it's a trawl survey, but we have some good, long historic time series, and yes, there's interannual variability, but they do seem to produce trends up and down through time. And so I guess the point of all of that is I think we do have some data that can give us some information. And what we're trying to do is be forthright with you to say, until we see some response from the data that we're getting in a positive direction, from the division standpoint, we're probably not going to be very supportive of changing things at this point. Now, I also wanted to say something about, I think you definitely hit on a key point of that May closure, but that wasn't the only point. I think the actual root of the May closure is that's the one of the prime spawning, that's the beginning of the spawning period, and the idea, it was a spawning closure, that's what it was.
If I could interject for 1 second.
Yeah.
Which I'm not opposed to, honestly, I get it, 100%. But it's contrary to logic to close the bait fishery, but then still have unlimited biomedical harvest during that period. So if you're concerned about the mating period, which I am as well, because I'd like to see this sustainable for the rest of my life and perhaps my kids' lives and their kids' lives. then it's contrary to logic to leave one open unlimited and then close the other completely, if that's what you're concerned about.
Yep, and so, you know, the nuance with the biomedical, so I agree with you that it's kind of interrupting a spawning period of time. The nuance with the biomedical is those crabs are actually taken but then returned, so they remain in the population. And that's a consideration, you know, that we use with the biomedical fishery. And it also has to do, I mean, that's an important aspect of this fishery. There's not many other fisheries where you have key human interactions with the species.
Absolutely. I get it, and I appreciate your efforts. I do. I'm just here to voice and you know, I could be compromising my biomedical ticket right now by saying, like, to have unlimited biomedical and then closed bait is contrary to conservation, if that's our main goal. And I'm okay with conservation. You could say we're shutting down horseshoe crabs completely, and I'd probably be okay with that. It's the contradiction of sense and logic that I'm having the biggest issue with.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is, for people like me, this is the trade-off that we're always in. So it's easy just to say, oh, yeah, shut it down. But that's not my job. My job is to find the middle where you can have a fishery, but keep it going.
Yes, and I agree with that. However, it was shut down by the council in May.
Well, let's do this, well, first, and just, a lot of this is
Let's-
sort of
that's the thing with
submit.
that, like, I don't want to get out. He does a great job.
Thank you.
He's fantastic, honestly.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't.
Okay. No, I think this is a really healthy and really informative discussion. I just want to clarify one point, and that is, and I know you know this, Ron, but sometimes we say things and I think it's important to clear for the record that this board makes recommendations to the DEM director who actually enacts the regulation. So when you say this board shut it down, this board may have made a recommendation consistent with that.
Absolutely.
But didn't
That's
actually shut it down. It would have been the director.
Sure.
Having said that, this is a great opportunity to engage because that's exactly why it's on the agenda. So Dave, what would you like to offer?
Jason, if you could clarify I understand medically they're taken out of the population, we extract their blood, is that what is harvested? And then they are put back and are they whole when they're put back in the sense that it has not interfered with their reproduction capability, et cetera?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Dave. I don't know that we know whether or not it interferes with their reproduction. I'm guessing it does because you've taken them away from the beaches where they're trying to spawn.
Are they away for long periods of time?
Not that long.
Like a day or two and then they put back?
I'm not sure about that. It's not, if anyone else knows that, speak up, but.
I can answer that.
Yeah.
I'm not on the DM team and I'm not a scientist by any stretch, but here in Rhode Island, so the process is they're taken off the beach until they're needed by the medical industry in Massachusetts. So they're held until the call comes and they say we need this many crabs. And they're jugged, they're in a pen. And so when the call comes, those crabs go up. So sometimes the call, I'll catch crabs in the first week of May, and sometimes the call comes in the third or fourth week of May. They're still alive, they're penned, but they're off the beach.
And who returns them to, and I assume they return to our beaches?
So if I could actually just, so this is a point of discrepancy. There's two different regulations on the internet. So which one I don't know is exactly 100% correct. I followed both as far as I could. But one says the harvester is responsible and the other, and actually it was during the same meeting where they came up with the 60 crab a day rule. It was the same meeting where they suggested they changed it from the harvester's responsibility to the dealer's responsibility, which makes sense because once you drop your crabs off as a harvester, you don't know when they're going to the biomedical industry and you don't know when they come back. So as a harvester, that information it's out of your realm. It's out of your wheelhouse. So I believe, so this is why I researched it diligently. I believe that during that meeting, the suggestion was made that the dealer is responsible. Now, whether or not that made it all the way through the process of becoming law, I've seen two conflicting things. The harvester is responsible or the dealer is responsible. And that's a huge difference to me personally.
The intent, though, is those animals are supposed to be taken and put back, in fact, where they came from, specifically, again, having to do with these spatial dynamics. So, yeah, I think Ron raises a good point. To me, the logical, I think what you said is logical. It should be the dealer in the biomedical, the way it's set up, because everything's kind of pivoting off in Rhode Island. It's only one.
Aren't horseshoe crabs like prehistoric? Aren't they like ancient? I mean,
they're cool.
And we don't know much about them.
They're neat.
Ancient, prehistoric, and cool.
Yeah.
I think so. I think the answer is yes. They're known to be to date way back.
I think they predate the dinosaurs by a lot.
I'm wondering if, certainly want to welcome any additional input, but I'm thinking, because I remember that very point about the discrepancy that you pointed out, and the sense of the council and the recommendation of the director, and whether or not that manifested accurately in the final reg, it might lend itself to revisiting at least that point for clarification, and then once we open the regs through a workshop process, any proposals are welcome from any member of industry, such as yourself, on the very points that you've been addressing tonight. So maybe we could try and tee that up at the appropriate time in the regulatory cycle over the next few months, whenever that might be, that horseshoe crabs best fits. At the very least, address that discrepancy about dealer versus harvester responsibility, and then perhaps delve into some of these other issues that you've brought up.
I would be ecstatic to have a workshop on the issue.
Okay. That sounds like a good resolution?
Yep.
Is the council comfortable with that way forward on this issue? If so, thank you, and thank you for bringing that forward. And we now have two more issues, so we'll see if we have just as much engagement on the next two. The next issue that was brought up, yes, Travis. Oh, I'm sorry. Please, and I meant to.
Jason, I have a quick question. Is there still weekly phone reporting requirements for the horseshoe crab fishery? I haven't, honestly, I gave that permit up a few years back, so I'm not.
I don't think any of that changed. A lot of what we did with the possession limits and all of that had to do with the fact that even though those regs were on the books, most people weren't following them anyways. So I don't think we changed those.
Still there.
They're still there.
Reporting is the same.
But the possession limit now allows us to catch up quicker before the quota's blown through.
Well, I mean, so I gave up that permit because I found that just to be a little onerous on top of the electronic reporting or logbooks that we already did.
Yeah.
And I think with your new regulations closing May and only 60 a day, like you said, you've really mitigated the chance of overrunning the quota. So I don't see why our current reporting system wouldn't be sufficient for the management of that.
Yeah, there is.
So I got the license, never fished it, but I was still supposed to call in once a week for a negative report, and I didn't do it, so I just gave the license up because I wasn't using it, and it wasn't worth the hassle.
Yeah.
But it seems to be now a more tightly controlled fishery where I think our normal reporting would be sufficient.
I'm usually I am always a proponent of efficiencies where we can get them, and so let me go back, chat with staff about, because I remember talking with them about this. Can we just abandon that? I think they do see the need for the permit to persist, but maybe the reporting can change. So I'll talk to them about that. This could be another element of the workshop.
Thanks, Ken. Anything else from the public on this, or anyone here tonight, I should say, on this issue? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next issue under this agenda item, which is, again, an issue brought up at the last meeting, and that is to allow for 2 licenses / possession limits from a single vessel. Jay, did you want to address that?
Yeah, so this one has come up a couple of times. Maybe I'll try and be brief and say, again, these opportunities to be efficient and to do these sorts of progressive things, I think the incentive behind it is a good one. Burning less fuel, being safer, all good stuff. I think we're kind of maxed out right now on, so John mentioned we're working on a multi-state possession limit pilot right now, and we're currently piloting a aggregate an enhanced aggregate program. And so what I said when this came up at the licensing workshop was, we like the idea. I think, again, we would need to run it in kind of a pilot mode where we would have a subset of fishermen that would be allowed to do this, and we'd have to then look, because the detractors are always concerned about increased catch rates, you know, these negative aspects, and we don't have any information on that, and so I would recommend doing it in like a study fleet type of a process. And the point of telling you that stuff earlier is we're kind of maxed out as far as the different pilots that we probably should do simultaneously. So I'd like to at least get past this first year. We're going into what will be the first year of the multi-state possession limit. That takes a lot of administration on not just the marine fisheries program side, but also law enforcement, who are going to have to field all of these calls and vetting applications, and there's all of these things that are involved in it. And same with the aggregate pilot. We'll revisit that in the fall, see what you all want to do, if you want to keep it going for another year. But I'd like to, you know, get this stuff at least in a stable trajectory, and then bring in something new. So I like the idea. I think we should hold off and you know, do it maybe not next year, but the following year, depending on what happens with the aggregate.
If I'm not mistaken, Jay, I think we have two fisheries where there is an allowance for two possession limits. It would be menhaden and shellfish, if I'm not mistaken?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yep.
so we already have that, but I think, Ron, your point may have been to seek to expand that a bit. So now now you have the floor to respond and offer any comments you may wish on the issue.
It would just, it would just be a slight frustration with the time. So as you just said, it's already out there. It's already been done. The study that Jay thinks he needs to do, if you took as an example the two fisheries that they already do it in, could be that baseline or that example. You know, it's already there. It already exists.
So the big difference is, actually, menhaden does have a quota now, but the dual possession limit was limited to the folks who are going to avail themselves of that dual possession limit. We have about half a dozen people who commercially harvest menhaden, and on the shellfish side, there's no quota. And so that's the part that makes this expansion different, and why we would need to do it carefully and thoughtfully.
And I'm for doing it right and careful. I think there's an opportunity without necessarily the long period of time in between. Since your hands are already full as well, you know, I mean, you've got a lot going on. So,
Which fisheries in particular would you be interested in pursuing?
So this brings up a point that I don't think made it to the agenda, but you know, it's basically a small boat fishery. So rod and reel fluke or sea bass or small pots. Really, I'm thinking about the non-industrialized fleet that could benefit greatly from the safety and the fuel economy, and you know, just in general being able to collect 100 pounds of fluke, hand lining 2 guys on a boat, you know, 25-foot boat, versus now the quota is, you know, 200 pounds for a dragger that could also have 5,000 pounds of another species, which is not going to happen on a small boat.
Mm.
So part of what didn't come up, I think, or through what I said in the last meeting, to be honest, I don't even remember if I brought it up, but a license that separates all of a sudden your industrialized vessels from your rod and reel small boat people, because really they are distinctly 2 different fisheries.
I'm wondering if there's a corollary there between federally permitted, state-only permitted. I'm wondering if you're referring, in essence, to state-only permitted or not necessarily?
No, not really. It's really
Okay.
about, it's a horsepower size thing.
Okay.
It's about how much gear you use to collect your harvest.
Okay.
So
okay.
You're limited on a small boat by how much you can bring in. So your 50 pounds of fluke isn't going to also include 5,000 pounds of squid. You're done. 50 pounds of fluke, you're done.
Okay.
So that was my thought. And so if you had two guys on the same boat, you could do 100 pounds of fluke. You're still not gonna do 5,000 pounds of squid.
Yeah.
You're just gonna get your 100 pounds of fluke and come home.
Gotcha. Okay, open the floor to the council for any questions or comments on this discussion item. Let me go to Nicole first, and then I'll go to the council. I'm sorry, Andy. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, just another point on Menhaden for the dual possession limit. Although we do have a state quota for Menhaden, the dual possession limit comes into effect once we've hit our state quota and we go into the incidental catch fishery. And the incidental catch landings are not counted against the state quota or the TAC that is set for Menhaden. So if there is an increase in effort, it doesn't affect the quota. Although if it does become a problem in the future, the Menhaden board can revisit it and decide how to handle it. It doesn't in fact affect the quota or the TAC for the coast.
Thanks for that clarification. Andy, did you? No. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I heard you. Would anyone from the council like to comment or
I
ask
just
a
want
question?
to say another great, comment and point. Thank you for bringing the point.
So it's Jason?
I think this subject came up long before I was on this council. I mean, back when I was hauling back 80,000 pound bags of herring. So it's been discussed, I think, for a long time, just for safety reasons, fuel reasons, economic reasons. I think that the benefits outweigh the negative end of it. Because either way, guys are going to go fishing, whether they're in one boat or two boats. I think the safety end of it comes into play. I mean, I still think when I first started dragging, there were still two guys in the point who they went out and had a 2-man crew on a 60-foot tractor, which was frightening to me. Be nice to have, I mean, even on a dragger would take benefit from it. So I think it would go across the board. I mean, I agree with what he says on the small end of it, but still, even gill netters, some of these guys go out in some awful weather because they have to. You got two guys, you can get your quota, you go home, you stay home.
Got it. Thanks, Jay.
Yeah, and I mean, again, good points. I love this idea. I'd love to investigate it further. But the points that you're making are the exact same points brought up for the multi-state possession limit in the aggregate. So, that's and I feel frustrated about the capacity issue as well. I wish I had more folks and we could handle all these things. I in fact think I push my folks kind of hard relative to what I see some of our neighboring states do is with the things that we'll take on simultaneously. But if we take on too much, we're going to start making mistakes. We'll do a bad job. That's going to hurt you guys first before us. And so I just want to make sure that we're doing things in a metered, thoughtful way. And I'm concerned to pull in another thing like this simultaneously with the two that we're doing.
So it's like a proof of concept. As that develops and as the division feels more comfortable with these expanded programs, more programs like it can be considered and come on board. That's what I hear being said. Is the council comfortable with that sort of, I guess it's like a mindset moving forward? It's not necessarily a specific proposal, but it's a recognition of the value of looking at that issue when it seems to fall into place appropriately. So thank you again, Ron, and you get there's a third issue, and the final issue for this agenda item is another one brought forward at the last meeting, and that is allowance of direct sales for marine products from vessels to consumers. Jay?
Yeah, so I may be misunderstanding this one, so I'll take a shot at it and I can get corrected. But so at least a similar thing was coming up. There were folks fishing in Newport in particular, that lobstermen and folks like that who were coming in with finfish and there was no dealer anymore over in that area for finfish. And so we worked on, I'm thinking this is different now. This coming into tonight, I thought that's what this meant, and I'm thinking I was wrong.
I don't think so either,
Yeah.
You should say it anyway.
Yeah.
Follow through.
So in any case, I think we solved that problem in that we did get some buy-in from, I think it's the Lobster Shack is going to start doing some finfish, and basically what they're going to do is kind of collect the finfish and then move it to a larger processor somewhere else. And so the issue of people coming in, and there was ideas like a courier license and things like that were coming up. In the end, it was the most straightforward approach was to license somebody over that way to act as a dealer. That way they can be the pivot for all of the reporting and all of that stuff to keep everything copacetic and not have somebody get pinched because they had 15 possession limits of black sea bass in the back of their truck going to town dock or something like that. So that was that issue, and then what came out of that was that's all well and good for 50 pounds of black sea bass, but what if I come in with 10,000 pounds of scup? Lobster Shack's not going to handle that. I don't have an answer for that yet. I don't know that now you've got some scale where now if you've got 10,000 pounds of scup, maybe you steam over to Seafoods or Town Dock or something like that, and you can't go into Newport with that. And it's unfortunate that is the case, but that's where we're at this point. The broader topic, now that I'm reading the bullet, this is something we've talked about in a couple of different ways, and so the one I'm most familiar with was with the party and charter industry, where there's models down in like Florida, I think is a place that does it a lot, where
Hook it and cook it.
yeah, hook it and cook it. So
That's awesome.
So
they'll take folks out, they'll catch their fish, and then they show up at a restaurant and get it cooked for them, the fish that they caught that day. Really cool stuff. I think as far as we're concerned, so there's two aspects of this. I think you all know this, but just to briefly restate, we've got the DEM side where we're concerned about the resource, accounting, meeting and tracking quotas, that sort of thing. And then there's the health department side of this. And so the stumbling block on this is with the health department side of it, because you could easily get a dealer's license from DEM and become a dealer and do exactly that, direct sales. Some people have done that. What becomes the problem is on the DOH side, when there's going to be consumers and the public buying this product, they have HACCP plans and all sorts of rules that a small scale operation just couldn't meet, as far as I understand it. So I don't know, we're still talking about this, and it's still being kind of worked through. There's a group at DEM connected with the governor's office and DOH. The key person is Sue Anderbaugh, and then Bob, you're also doing some seafood marketing stuff as well. So I think the concept is still being worked on, but I'll let you take it.
Yeah, I'll just jump and just say, so the Department of Health is really the, I don't want to call it a stumbling block because they have a job to do and it's their responsibility, but it is an issue in terms of the Department of Health's approval of direct sales to consumers. They are fine, or were fine, and remain fine with live animals, and that's why a dockside sale endorsement for the sale of lobsters and crabs is currently allowed. And I'm sure you're familiar with that, where you can sell right from the vessel to consumers live lobsters and crabs. And the Department of Health, I remember being in the room when this was sort of worked through, and their feeling is, well, if the animal's alive, we don't have much in the way of public health concerns in terms of the quality of the product. But when the animal is dead, it's a different story, and they're very focused on making sure that health standards are maintained to ensure public health safety. But they are acutely aware of the interest of doing the very sort of thing that I think you're interested in, which is, the farmer's market kind of approach to taking your own catch and marketing it directly to the public. And what I've heard from our colleagues at the Department of Health is that if we, the collective community of interest, put on the table a specific proposal, their response is, well, what do you mean? Are you talking about fish that are high in histamines, which have, there's risk levels associated with all shellfish and all sorts of different animals. And depending on the health risks and depending on the protocols, there may be a way forward, but they need clear guidance on what would be requested, what is being requested. So I am indeed, as Jason indicated, working with the director through a seafood marketing collaborative process, which is kind of separate from this process, but related because it involves, elevating the status of Rhode Island seafood in the marketplace. This very issue of direct sales has been in the mix for a long time, And we would welcome your input, and particularly with regard to any specific proposal that you may have in mind as to, instead of just throwing open the doors too broadly, which I don't think the Department of Health would feel comfortable with, some kind of targeted program that would apply, to certain types of species, certain types of instances, and, I guarantee you the issues are gonna be proper icing, and what do you do with that which you don't sell, where does that go? Their greatest fear is people are gonna put things in their garages overnight, and then, somebody's from the public is gonna get served and get sick, and before you know it, we've collapsed our good reputation for quality seafood. I talked more than I thought I would. Let me go to you now to see if anything Jason and I just said is relevant to your interest.
Well, here's the interesting thing. So I fish out of Westerly. I sell in Point Judith because it's the only market that's the market as close to Westerly as you can possibly get. So I land my fish 100 yards from a high-end restaurant. Sometimes their catch of the day is Alaskan cod. So just, again, this is a logic issue more than anything else. So I have to transport my fish. It's gonna spend more time in coolers in my truck to Point Judith. I land it in Point Judith. If it's any of the species like scup or sea bass or something that they're not gonna sell locally retail, they're gonna ship it back to New York. So the health department is gonna see my fish, which I caught, say at 8 a.m., get to town dock, say, 2 p.m. after a long ride in the cooler and such, and then sit at town dock for a day until it gets shipped to market the next morning. It gets shipped to New York, so now it's going over across state lines, gets shipped to the market in New York, to where it goes to auction, is then shipped to 2 or 3 other places after that. So it actually gets to the consumer 3, 4, 5 days later. So my proposal is that, and this actually curtails into the workshop tomorrow, which I won't be able to attend, but licensing and documentation. I believe you guys want fishermen to be able to document their catches, either before they get off the boat or when they land or so forth. That's what you're shooting for. That would be ideal for everybody in the quota system. If you land your fish and you document it, it's accounted for. And then you should be able to sell it to your family members, your community, your restaurants, the fish markets nearby. So there's an opportunity here where if you, let's just go back to the artisanal license. Let's say you had a license for a smaller boat, a smaller vessel. No restaurant in its right mind would take 10,000 pounds of scup. But 100 pounds of scup, fresh scup, or 50 pounds of sea bass, or 50 pounds of fluke, there are restaurants, I could gift that to my community and make a substantial amount more money than driving it and having it shipped all over the world. So as somebody that would like to be a fisherman that struggles now, getting 20 cents a pound for scup and shipping it 3 hours to Point Judith and then back, like 3 hours round trip, and the quality of the fish plummeting and so forth, I would like to get exceptionally fresh fish from locally caught waters onto the plates of restaurants and family members and community members in my town. I live in Westerly. Our town seal, I don't know if you know this, but our town seal is 3 fish in front of a net, right?
Yeah.
No, this is for real.
Yeah.
But yet 30 fishermen from Westerly, if they do it legally, which I hope they all do, have to drive to Point Judith, or there's one truck that comes down if you want to do business with a truck that comes down, and for your fish to get old.
Yeah.
For the quality of your product that you harvested and cared for to go in with a whole bunch of other product that other people don't care for as much as you do. Maybe, or maybe they care for it better, but I want my quality product to go to my quality people.
I think it's a winning proposal, and I'd like to suggest that I coordinate with you to set up a meeting with the Department of Health folks, and we put that very issue on the table that you're suggesting, and we open it up for their feedback and discussion to see if we can absolutely connect those dots. Because it's like you said, it's a common sense proposal.
It's just logic.
Yeah, no, we're on board. Conceptually, we're all totally on board. I'm guessing I speak for everyone when I say, we just now need to figure out how we can move through those regulatory barriers, which are, people like to poo-poo the regulations and the bureaucrats, but a lot of times they're there for a reason, and that's to protect public health. So as long as we can steer a clear path that guarantee is the wrong word, that provides for appropriate public health protections
Sure.
and consumer safety, I think we can get that done. And I would love to work with you on that.
I think it's 1,000, I mean, safety, consumer safety wise and quality of fish wise. I mean, we literally have fish now that get caught in Point Judith that are shipped to China to be, to be cleaned and then shipped back to the United States.
Great.
So how could the Department of Health, how could they say that's okay?
Right.
And that's good practice when they won't let you literally bring a fish in and get it on a table in 5 minutes?
And again, I just want to let you know that they are open and accommodating to a discussion that I want to have with them, and I will take that on as something that you guys, that one of the few things that Jason doesn't have to follow up on. I'll agree to follow up on. Let me bring the council in, and then Ken, I see your hand up, and let me get the council in first. Dave?
I think it's a great idea. The reason why it doesn't happen, because we checked this out for the Party and Charter Boat Association, it's the chain. So that's what the food, that's what the health department was extremely concerned about. But maybe there's a way, as Bob said, present the proposal, and maybe, I don't want to say a little mini co-op, because you don't want to get the thing too big, but if a number of fishermen got together there and made sure that the fish was taken care of according to standards, then maybe it could be sold to local.
And just as a sidebar, thank you, but as a sidebar, in Massachusetts, you can do it, and in Connecticut, you can do it. So in a from a small business perspective, so forget fishing and fish. We're a small business, we're in competition with Massachusetts and Connecticut. We can't compete. I can't compete with a fisherman in Connecticut because his fishing license allows him to sell fish to anybody that he wants.
Right.
So I'm getting 20 cents a pound, and he's getting $4, $5 a pound. Same in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. I mean, it just, from a small business standpoint, if that's the avenue you have to take, if it takes a different kind of perspective to get it done, small business standpoint, we're pooched.
So I was aware of that distinction. One of the first paths I'd like to go down is get those Connecticut and Massachusetts regulations, see how they look, see if we can, not at this moment, but I mean, thank you. I just really feels to me like we've got a way forward here on this issue, and I look forward to partnering with you on that. Other questions, comments from the council? Jason?
Just if people aren't familiar with, just look up New England Fishmongers and Dock to Dish. And that'll give you a couple of examples of people that are making a lot of money doing that. Montauk has been doing really well. There's a couple of boats that fish out of the point that actually are in New York, and they land their fish in New York. It goes directly to restaurants.
Thank you.
It's good to look. I mean, it's pretty interesting. New England Fishmongers, they're crazy.
And I just want to also note that, because it's kind of part of the same, that for hire, hook it and cook it?
Yeah.
Is also on the agenda to be pursued. They're kind of separate issues, one's commercial, one's for hire, but they're kind of knocking on the same door. And I think I saw Ken and maybe, I'm sorry, your name?
Chelsea.
Chelsea, I thought I saw both of you thumbs up on that, so I just want to let you know that we're as interested in that as we are in pursuing Ron's proposal.
I want to eat Ron's fish. Let me eat Ron's fish. I can't do it in China. I got
Anyone else in the council regular? Ken, let me go to Ken, go ahead.
You mentioned earlier narrowing it down for the health department. Just a quick, when you said that, the first thing I thought of was, well, it would probably make sense that it would be whole fish only.
Whole fish
Then
only.
you're not worried about cutting the fish on a boat or what have you. And I mean, personally, that's all I would want to sell. Because I don't want to. You can't be cleaning the fish and selling them. It's not worth it. And I pretty regularly all summer have people come up to my boat and ask me if they can buy fish, and they look at me like I have 6 heads, and I'm like, no, I actually can't sell this to you. Like, you can't have it. They're like, no, like, it's there. Let me have it. I can't sell it to you. It happens all summer, and a lot of times it's those 20-cent scup that I'll charge $1 for and be thrilled, and those people just got fish cheaper than they could ever buy it in any store.
Good point.
So it's a win-win for both sides, I think.
Thank
but I mean,
you.
I also understand the health concerns, so.
But I think your whole fish point is.
And the hook and cooking thing, I've been doing that every winter in Florida. We love it. I think that would be amazing for charter boats and stuff.
Thanks. Additional thoughts, comments from anyone on this agenda item? Ron.
As another aside, when you said you'd like a narrower vision, you could definitely, so if you go to the quota and documentation for fishermen to put it on paper or get it on your computer, you could put a time limit in there. So what you catch on May 16th has to be sold on May 16th, and you'd have documentation on both ends. So you'd have to get documentation on when it was caught and landed, but you'd also have documentation or have to get documentation on when it was sold, so there's accountability.
Yeah.
So it's that, you have a 12-hour or a 24-hour window and that's it, you're done after that. And that works. Like, high quality, awesome fish caught that day, like, that's
And
what
everybody wins, everybody
It
wins.
seems like
You, the harvester, the retailer, and the consumer all win, which is why I think it's a winning proposal, I really do. Thank you, I really think this was a great discussion. Anything else on this, Jay?
Just a quick one to what, the point Ron just made, and I agree with him that accountability is important, and the other kind of hidden part of that is chain of custody, and that's the challenge. So that, how do you know that fish is that one that is kind of in the process? I'm just raising it as.
Yeah, you and I will trade contact information, I think I may already have yours, but just to make sure, and then we will pursue this, and we'll certainly keep the council in the loop on this issue, because I sense from the body language that there's interest on the part of the council in pursuing this. It really isn't a marine fisheries issue so much as it's a broader state, Rhode Island state government issue, I think, but we'll look into it. We'll report back to you, and you and I will form a sort of partner approach on this one. With that, I think we're ready to turn to the next agenda item, which is item 8, regional fisheries science effort to evaluate impacts and prepare for offshore wind development. I don't see Julia here, okay?
I'm prepared.
Okay.
So I'm just giving you what Julia gave me. And I don't know if, I think you all have met Julia at this point, maybe Katie you haven't, but any questions you have on the offshore wind process is just writ large. She's the person that you want to talk to. She's knows more about it than anyone else on the coast, including the folks building the turbines, I think.
She's next door over there. With
Yeah, oh yeah, so she is actually at the FAB meeting next door, which is why she's not here. Okay, so what we wanted to do, I will be quick, is make you aware that we have issued, there has been an RFP, a request for proposals issued. This is one that is specific to our area. It's called Pilot Studies for Regional Fisheries Monitoring in Relation to Southern New England Offshore Wind Projects. So this one is going to be specific to that Rhode Island, Massachusetts area of mutual interest. It's going to be focused there. There are some highlights of the RFP. There's $1 million available for one or more studies. The funding is provided by BOEM, Mass CEC, and then Rhode Island. DEM also contributed money as well. And so I may have brought this up. It was the weirdest thing I've ever experienced, but we scrounged around the couch cushions, came up with $200,000 like a year ago, and could not find someone to take our $200,000 to do a study out in the Vineyard Wind area, which had construction imminent. We knew we needed to get out there, and so we were pushing really hard. In the end, we were able to collaborate with Mass CEC and BOEM. Collectively, we have $1 million now, so it's we thought that was the way to go. It got a little more leverage out of our little pot of money. So these studies, will be pretty good. $1 million you can do a decent study with. So again, these will be focused in the area like where Vineyard Wind is and the Orsted projects, the areas that are close to us. There are 3 topic areas. The first is fishery resource studies. So this would be things like a gillnet survey, ventless pop survey, that kind of thing. The second topic is seafloor habitat studies within the wind energy area. So actually mapping out the sediments and the benthic ecology from those areas. And then the final one is technical studies. And the idea there is how to maximize compatibility of offshore wind fishing. So I think a lot of you have heard about the interference with radars and things like that these can cause. And so the idea would be to develop some technologies that do work in these areas. And it doesn't have to be just radar. It could also be fishing gears that work well within a turbine area. So it would be technological type advancements. The proposals are due October 17th. 2019, so the RFP is out now. And then, you know, if you're interested in who's managing it, just come talk to me after. I don't know who these people are. But okay, so the final, we noticed on our listserv, so the RFP went out. If anyone did not get that or deleted it, I'm happy to resend it to you. Just reach out. And we've got a link to the RFP on our offshore website, Marine Fisheries website. So you can go there, you can call Julia, you can call me. The most important detail for you all to know is that during the project review and selection process, the project selection team will consult with the Fisheries Council at key junctures. So we're gonna come to you. Here's the first cut of proposals that we received. So you can weigh in on the ones that you think are most relevant, that would have the greatest feedback into the stuff that you care about. So we will be coming to you and seeking your advice. That's it.
Thanks. Questions for Jason? Including when I'm limited to that couch, where those cushions.
Yeah.
I want one of those.
They're big cushions.
Yeah, they have a quick question. The collaboration between Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Bohm, was there, the three categories did not exclude recreational, but I didn't hear that word mentioned. By way of example, you know, the recreational community has been advocating for rod and reel studies, like on Cox Ledge in particular. Because we feel, even though, you know, some scientists feel that trawl surveys can effectively account for the fish that are there, and we contend that it really can't. And I say rod and reel, I certainly mean that there are a ton of commercial rod and reelers who fish that area, as well as recreational rod and reel. So I'm asking the question, I couldn't tell by the proposal if it was, would it consider recreational rod and reel studies in those areas?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
So yeah, it's definitely not exclusive to commercial. And if a good proposal with a rod and reel study, so they've been doing one out there, I think you know that already, with charter boats. In fact, we have a person on staff now who developed.
Well, RISA supplied the anglers for it, and the Party and Charter Boat Association supplied the party boats, so to speak. Yeah, so it was a good collaboration in that way.
So there's precedent there, and there's no reason why that wouldn't be, and so it would. This is a nice opportunity if we come forward and say, here, there was a rod and reel proposal and a gillnet, and you know, you can then voice your support how you see fit.
Pelagic fish included in that study at all?
Which study?
The study parameters, the three categories.
Oh,
could
the
it be
RFP.
pelagics? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Other questions? Anyone from the audience? Seeing none, thank you for that briefing, and it obviously is an issue that sounds like it's going to be, that will be circling back to the council as the proposals come forward, so we'll be coming back to this. Item 9 is direct final rule filings. A little quirky issue here in terms of the sort of standard process that's been followed. So I'm going to leave it up to either Pete or Jay to kind of explain a little bit about this. I think it turns out to be a non-substantive issue, but I think it's important to provide good context for exactly what this is about.
Yeah, so thanks, Bob. And so this particular set, we did 2 direct final rule filings, one in part 3, one in part 7. Both of them were quasi-technical in nature. One was a compliance issue with a black sea bass fish pot requirement that had inadvertently gotten dropped out of a filing that we had done a couple of years ago, I think. And then Pete can give you the details on either of them if you want, but the point is, we did direct final rule, the direct final rule process. What happens with that is, we actually publish a notice, but we don't do any public hearing, we don't do any workshops. We just publish the notice. If we don't have anyone respond that they're objecting to it, then at the end of the 30-day period, it goes in to law. Now, we only used it here because the two things that had happened we felt were basically technical revisions, but we were advised that they were not technical revisions, and so that's why we had to go through this different process. There's actually a process for technical revisions, but there's certain parameters that you have to meet to be able to call it a technical revision. So this was a process that we used to clean up, for lack of a better word, some items that we have missed or that have gotten dropped inadvertently. And so we're coming to you to tell you about them because we still have in our process, the council has the opportunity to make recommendations on any of these things. And so the way that would work in this case is you would say, we hate what you did, bring that back out to public hearing, and we would do that. What we are, so this one we did backwards. So what we will do from now on, if we do this again, we'll do it sparingly. It's not something we intend on abusing or doing a lot. But if we do another direct final rule, the process we're going to follow is we're going to not only post the notice, which that happens through the normal channels, but we will reach out to you directly as a council and say, look, we're doing a direct final rule. Here's the annotated reg. Call us if you have questions on it, and in the end, you get an opportunity to make a recommendation or object to it, which would kill the whole process. That's what terminates the process.
Could that be a listserv as well, so the general public could also be informed?
Yeah, and we did that in this
Oh, we
case
did.
as
Good.
well.
Good.
Because you still have to do the public notice per the normal process.
Okay.
But it's just not having the workshop, and that is what makes it atypical.
Thank you. So in a sense, it's teed up here as a provide recommendation to the director, but the reality, if I'm not mistaken, is that these have already been filed. They were
Correct.
noticed in July, filed in August. So it is, as Jason said, a little backward. In fact, it is backwards from the standard process we follow, and will continue to follow for all substantive regulatory proposals and proposed amendments, as well for any further use of this mechanism for rulemaking. Questions for Jason on this issue? Any comments, any strenuous objections to either of the two changes that were made? Seeing none, thank you for that, and I think I appreciate that explanation, Jason. I think that helps a lot and kind of puts this issue in context, because I was also caught off guard when I saw it, given its unique nature. I'm not sure we've ever done this before. It may be the first time, at least in this exact way. That's my sense. Pete, did you want to add to that?
So just that we only use it for limited cases, clarifications, restructuring. I've tortured you all with a lot of restructuring clarifications. It would have been so nice to do it this way, but corrections to things that we see are inaccurate, FMP compliance issues, nothing that's ever time sensitive. So if there is a problem, we can just go back to hearing with it. So moving forward, we'll let you know before we do it that we're going to do it. We'll get the listserv out, so you'll see that, and then we'll bring it back to the council afterwards. So that's what we're looking to do.
Okay. Anything else on this? Seeing none, we're on to, we have two more items on the agenda. The next is the economic impact of fishing. And I believe this is largely an FYI, although I think Dave Monti may wish to speak to this.
Sure.
And it's with regard to the latest annual publication put out by NOAA Fisheries called Fisheries Economics of the United States. It takes them a while to tally up all the data, so the most recent report is for the year 2016. That came out, I believe, a couple months ago. It's in your meeting materials. It's quite a meaty document, and I think it includes a lot of really interesting and helpful information, both with regard to commercial and recreational fisheries throughout the U.S. and every imports, exports. It gets state specific, it gets port specific, it gets sector specific. And with that, Dave, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I just wanted everyone to be aware of, because I wasn't until I started to get engaged with it, but the Magnuson-Stevens Act is the fishing law of this nation. That's what empowers NOAA to manage fisheries in federal waters, et cetera. And so Congress mandates NOAA to do annual reports on fisheries. So they do an annual report, they do status of stocks every year. They actually file a report with Congress. They also do Fisheries of the United States report, and then they do this third report, Fisheries Economics of the United States. So every single year, based on the criteria that Bob mentioned, they update their study in commercial and recreational fishing. And commercial is broken down into both imports and then fish that are actually landed in the United States. Imports take advantage of to share with Rhode Island political leaders to sort of demonstrate the economic impact of commercial and recreational fishing in Rhode Island. So I just wanted to point it out, and there is a copy of the most recent one, as Bob mentioned. So that's it.
I believe Point Judith remains the second most valuable port on the East Coast after New Bedford. One of the many highlights from the report, and that's just on the commercial side and a lot on rec as well, but it's a really useful document, and it really helps, as Dave just said, emphasize just how important commercial and recreational fishing is in Rhode Island, in the region, throughout the U.S. Thoughts, comments on this issue? Rod?
I'm curious for Rhode Island's sake, what something like I mentioned previously does to that economic impact. So when they take fish that used to be processed in Rhode Island, they're caught in Rhode Island. They used to be processed in Rhode Island. Now they're shipped overseas to be processed and brought back. I'm exceptionally curious to see what kind of economic impact that has to the region, to Rhode Island, to have that sort of
good point.
To have that sort of thing take place.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I hear you.
So they give you a little indication. I'm looking at commercial for Rhode Island total impacts, but then they break it out: commercial harvesters, seafood processors and dealers, importers, seafood wholesale and distribution, and retail. So it certainly seems like there's enough data there that they could sort of figure out, because they break it out with separate numbers, and then they break out every single species as to what it contributes to the pot. So it's very detailed.
Check it out.
Yeah. Let me go to Jay and then Ken. Jay?
Yeah, just a real quick one, Ryan. There are two natural resource economists at URI who I think would be super interested in, and may have actually done some work on this already, Hiro Yoshida and Tom Sproul, and they've been doing a lot of fisheries work as of late. So that, I've sort of logged what you just said, and if I'm going to talk to them about it as well. And if an RFP comes out that this might be relevant to, we could even collaborate with you to kind of investigate this stuff. So I've logged it, and we'll see.
Just curiosity.
Yeah.
I think it's Sproul, maybe?
Tom Sproul and Hiro Yoshida.
Yeah, I think you said Sprout. Maybe I misheard, but I think it's
Tom
Sproul.
Sproul, yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. Thanks, sorry if I missed.
Yeah, just on the subject, I know Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation and Tom Sproul got together. They published a paper, I believe, last fall.
Yep.
The economic impact of commercial fishing in Rhode Island.
Actually, I think it actually got finalized more recently, but you're right.
Yeah.
It's that same initiative, yes. And it's on their website, and it's a wonderful resource to go to, yeah. Thank you. Anything else on this issue? Seeing no hands, we'll move on to essentially the last issue of the night. It's titled Transiting to from Block Island with Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass. I'm going to roll that into a quick summary of that, plus two other issues that have gone out to notice. Ironically, the notice period ends today, and by today that is in like 4 hours and 29 minutes. It's midnight tonight. But let me just give you a quick sense of what this issue is about and how it maps into what I'm going to tell you. So, out to notice is the federal rulemaking, final federal rules to implement, I know this is going to sound wonky, but I'll give it to you, Framework Adjustment 14 to the Joint State Federal Fishery Management Plan for Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass. There are 3 measures that are proposed for final rulemaking. One is to allow for conservation equivalency in the recreational black sea bass fishery. That is allowing coastwide federal waters regulations to be waived when states adopt regulations that limit harvest to the coastwide RHL, which stands for Recreational Harvest Limit. That is a mechanism already in effect and long in place for summer flounder, and it would now, if this rule is finalized and takes effect, be applicable to black sea bass, recreational black sea bass. The upshot is that recreational vessels fishing in federal waters would be bound by a single set of regulations, namely the regulations of the state in which they land. So it really simplifies and streamlines the management program, and vessels fishing in federal waters don't have to be worried about whether, they're fishing according to federal rules, which could differ from state rules. They wouldn't if they're waived, but it's a tool in the toolbox, and one that the Rhode Island representatives to the ASMFC strongly supported, and it's now about to be considered for final adoption. That's item one. Item two, and it now goes to the agenda item here, is the Block Island Sound Transit Zone. If the rule is finalized, it would establish a transit corridor through federal waters, namely the same corridor that's currently in effect for striped bass. And that corridor would be, and that striped bass corridor is shown in a map, which I can pass around if anyone, I think you're probably familiar with it, and I know this is awkward, but I'm going to just hold it up, and I'm going to say there's Block Island, and there are the state waters around Block Island. Here's Point Judith and Narragansett Bay. Here are the state waters of southern Rhode Island, and here are the waters of Long Island Sound. And this checkered area is the relatively narrow band of federal waters that sort of bisects the two areas of state waters. And if anyone on the council wants to look at this, I'd be happy to share it with you. I'll go on now to say that with regard to, so the proposal is to adopt a transit corridor that is the same corridor currently in effect for striped bass, and have it apply to summer flounder, black sea bass, and scup. It would pertain to all recreational fishermen and all non-federally permitted for-hire vessels and all non-federally permitted state vessels holding, state commercial vessels holding applicable state permits or licenses. The bottom line is that if you are in possession of summer flounder, scup, and or black sea bass legally harvested in state waters, vessels would be allowed to return home, in essence, via those federal waters, that stretch of federal waters, that corridor, if transiting with your gear stowed, if you're a commercial vessel, and of course you can't be fishing in that zone. It's a transit zone. So that's something that has actually been, if I'm remembering correctly, it's been probably 10 years that this issue has come up in public discourse here before the council as something that a lot of our constituents have been wanting and asking for because of that concern about getting caught by the feds transiting from Block Island to Point Judith or westerly or anywhere north of Block Island, or in this case even over to Montauk, legally possessing a state harvest, either recreational or commercial. So that, I think, is why it's teed up here as the most important issue, because it's something that this council has long been supportive of, interested in and supportive of, and lo and behold, it looks like it's finally coming to fruition. I'll just quickly summarize the third issue, and that is allowing for a maximum size provision for summer flounder and scup, thereby allowing for the use of slot limits. There's no indication, just so you know, that the council or commission is planning to pursue a slot limit proposal for either species. So this will really just serve as a tool in the regulatory toolbox that could be considered for use in the future. So it's just, again, providing that tool, not by any means implementing a maximum size in the recreational fishery for summer flounder or scup, but it could be used for that purpose if enacted. And the last thing I'll say is that the division did submit a letter of support for all three measures just today, just making the deadline, and I have that here, and I think we were planning to provide copies to the council, and we'll do that. We'll send those out to you because I did have you. You are copied on the letter, as So I will make sure the council gets copies of the letter of support that was submitted. I looked in the record and there was only 3 as of late this afternoon. I didn't see any opposition to the transit corridor, which I think is the most important for most Rhode Island interests. So it looks like this is going to finally happen. I guess that would be my take, is that we're very close to final rulemaking on all 3 issues, with the transit corridor being, I think, the one that's of most interest and importance. So that, it's an FYI issue, but I think it's obviously very timely, given today is the last day of the public comment period. NOAA does a great job on their website posting the very detailed analysis of the issue, and I have that here, and you can certainly access it yourself. I think we provided an email to all council members, as well as listserv to the general public on this. So hopefully you're well aware of what I just reviewed, but at this point I'll be happy to entertain any questions. It's really an FYI issue, but just letting you know that we're it's probably been 10 years, but it looks like this fall is finally going to get over the end line. So it'll be a great day when that happens. Anything else? Anything on this issue? Seeing no hands.
Okay, just one.
Yeah,
I brought it
Jason.
up before, but what's going to happen to the boats that fish out Westwood?
They'll-
You'd be
they'll-
in violation,
No, this would apply to any boat fishing.
but you'd have to take that corridor back.
Let me
to
show you.
Point
Oh,
Unit.
you know what? Thanks, Jason, for bringing this up. I'm just going to pass this down to Jason. So if you, there were.
So they have a
there
couple
were-
options?
Well,
Okay.
this is the option that is being proposed for adoption, and if you'll
Okay.
notice, that's a very broad swath.
Okay.
So that concern that
Oh,
you
it
had.
changed from the last time,
It
yes.
changed.
Okay.
There was a proposal for a much more narrow corridor that would only go from like North Blight to
Yes.
Point Judith. And Jason, you made a very good point, others as well, about, hey, wait a second now, that doesn't really help the folks in Wesley, or we're gonna have to
West-
hook a
Charles
left
County.
and so this is the corridor that is out to notice, and there are no other options being considered other than this one.
Great.
Anything else on this? Seeing none, is there any other business to be brought before the council tonight? Seeing no hands, is there any objection to adjourning? Seeing no objection, we are adjourned. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of the evening.